please rise for the procession of the Vice-Chancellor. Please remain standing as I call on the Catholic chaplain to lead us with the opening prayer.
Our help is in the name of the Lord. Almighty and ever-living God, we are so much grateful to you for the gift of our lives. We thank you for the gift and life of Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. We thank you for all that you use us to accomplish here on earth in touching many lives and also helping us to bridge the gap between research and industry. We thank you in a very special way for this occasion, the Professorial Inaugural Lecture to be delivered by our own professor, Micheal Poku-Boansi. We thank you for his life, for the gift and life of his family, and we thank you for how far you have brought him in this academic journey. As you have gathered here to witness this great occasion, we entrust ourselves to you, and we ask you to send down your Holy Spirit into our midst to grant us a fruitful and inspiring Professorial Inaugural Lecture. These and many blessings we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Please be seated. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Great Hall of the best university in the world in terms of SDG 4. It's a very great time to be alive and to witness this. Shall we please applaud KNUST? On behalf of the Vice-Chancellor, I welcome you to the last inaugural lecture for this academic year. Today, one of the university's most distinguished academic and alumnus of the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Professor Micheal Poku-Boansi, delivers his inaugural lecture on the topic Transport Poverty in Africa, Planning for Our Mobility Futures in an Era of Sustainability. It will be a very great delivery. We look forward to learning a lot from what he will tell us, but to appreciate the significance of inaugural lectures in the life of KNUST. It's my pleasure to welcome the Registrar, Mr. Andrew Squisi Fuati. Please applaud him.
Inaugural lectures offer a rare opportunity for newly appointed professors to introduce themselves and to present an overview of their contributions to their chosen discipline before academic colleagues and research collaborators. The lectures also serve as a platform for celebrating the academic prowess of a newly appointed professor with their families, friends, mentors, and colleagues. The Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Kumasi, in keeping with best practices in academia, has made inaugural lectures a cardinal part of its academic life and experience. As an institution of higher learning, with the responsibility of solving societal problems, inaugural lectures provide us the opportunity to showcase what has been done in terms of groundbreaking research to support national and international development. Madam Chair, with your permission, I want to mention some of the professors who have delivered their inaugural lectures in the university. They include Professor Dr. George Rekun-Brobe, the late Professor Kwesi Akwansandam, Emeritus Professor Kishore Singh, Emeritus Professor Kwesi Kwafu Adakwa, Professor Francis Boachi, Emeritus Professor Anthony Apeke Adimado, Professor Kasim Kasanga, Professor Dr. Daniel Buo, Professor Victoria Pearl Jobefia, Professor Richard Tuye Awua, Professor Abuaje Menye, Professor Robert Kwame Nkum, Professor Charles Kwame Kankam, Professor Richard Akroma, Professor William Otu Ellis, Professor Robert Clement Abedu, Professor Christian Ejare, and Professor Divine Kweku Ahaji. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, in keeping with the tradition, the university is privileged to once again to witness another inaugural lecture to be delivered by one of its distinguished professors. Thank you.
To introduce our chairperson for today's inaugural lecture, it's my pleasure to welcome the chairperson for the Public Lecture Committee of KNUST. Please welcome Professor Mrs. Atinuke Adebanji.
Madam Chair, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please permit me to read a brief profile of the chairperson of this august occasion. Professor Mrs. Rita Akosua Dickson is the Vice-Chancellor of the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Kumasi. Professor Rita Dickson is an alumni that KNUST is very proud of. She is the first female to serve as the Vice-Chancellor of the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. I'm proud to appointment as the Vice-Chancellor and investiture. On the 1st of August of 2020, she had served as the 21st Pro-Vice-Chancellor of KNUST. She is also the first female to have occupied the position of the Pro-Vice-Chancellor in KNUST. Also proud to this appointment in 2018, she was the Dean of the Faculty of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences at our College of Health Sciences. Professor Rita Dickson, a graduate of KNUST with a Bachelor of Science degree in Pharmacy in 1994 and acquired an MPharm in Pharmacognosy in 1999 and from the same university. In 2003, she was awarded a Commonwealth Scholarship to study for a Ph.D. degree at King's College, University of London, where she specialized as a phytochemist. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as an accomplished phytochemist whose research covers natural products with anti-infective, wound healing, anti-inflammatory, antipyretic, and anti-diabetic properties based on their ethnopharmacological usage in the treatment and management of communicable and non-communicable diseases, Professor Dickson has distinguished herself. Her scientific knowledge and research expertise have impacted the international scientific community through training mentorship, and scientific appraisals. She is very visible on renowned academic platforms with a research impact of over 24,000 reads in article reads and more than 700 citations in various scientific disciplines. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to further mention a few additional accomplishments of our chairperson, Professor Rita Dickson is a fellow and a board member of the Pharmacy Council and Pharmaceutical Society of Ghana. She is a member of the council and a fellow of the Ghana College of Pharmacists, a member of the Commonwealth Pharmacists Association. Professor Dickson is also the president's appointee to the governing board of the National Vaccine Institute in Ghana. Professor Rita Dickson is very passionate about demystifying STEM programs for girls and training the youth into global transformational leaders through her talks and other engagements. Our chairperson has further demonstrated this passion for training the youth through our flagship Sunsalt program, which was instituted to promote digital literacy amongst needy students in KNUST-TEK. The program has given new laptops to 1,397 students, with an additional 457 to be given out this Friday, thus making a total of 1,854 laptops issued to needy students in KNUST-TEK. I think she deserves a round of applause. Thank you, madam. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. She deserves a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, our chairperson is married with 4 daughters. She is a devout Christian and serves as the deaconess and marriage counselor at the Grace Baptist Church here in Kumasi. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, could you please join me to welcome our chairperson, Professor Mrs. Rita Akosua Dickson, and she will be presenting the speaker for this occasion. A round of applause for Madam Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much, Professor Adebanji. What you forgot to add is that the over 400 laptops that we have received, we've also received more than 10 times that number of students who need them. So we need more laptops. Thank you very much. Past Vice-Chancellors and Pro-Vice-Chancellors. Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Registrar, our distinguished lecturer, Professor Micheal Poku-Boansi, Provost of Colleges, Deans and Directors, Heads of Department, members of Convocation, senior and junior staff of the university, Reverend Ministers present, Nananum, Honorable Members of Parliament and MMDCs present, Board Chairpersons, Captains of Industry and CEOs present, members of the Ghana Institute of Construction, family and friends of our distinguished scholar, proud alumni of the university, my dear students, our friends from the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to you all. I said a very good evening to you all. Thank you. It is indeed with great pleasure and honor that I preside over the 3rd inaugural lecture this year to be delivered by our esteemed scholar. This is of utmost significance because it is the 3rd in a series of lectures to be delivered by renowned professors of our great and noble university. This lecture addresses an emerging global and topical issue that must be of interest to all of us: transport poverty. These 2 words, whichever way you would like to look at it, is very, very familiar and close. We are very grateful to our distinguished lecturer, Professor Micheal Poku-Boansi, for contributing to this series of inaugural lectures. Trust me, we have a very, very insightful evening ahead of us. So please, just relax and take it all in. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, today's lecture is a celebration of a distinguished faculty member of our august university who has contributed tremendously to research in urban and land use planning, resettlement planning and development, transportation planning, climate change, housing, and urban resilience. He is prolific with disseminating his knowledge both at the national and international levels. His contribution to the field of urban and transport planning and urban studies has provided a richer understanding of the urban development dynamics in Ghana and Africa. Professor Micheal Poku-Boansi is currently the Deputy Director of the School of Graduate Studies, KNUST, and his service to humanity at both local and global levels is exemplary. I call Professor Micheal Poku-Boansi. Congratulations. Thank you. You can do better. You can do better for him. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. This great university is deeply honored and proud to associate herself with all that you have worked very hard for and have achieved, and we do celebrate you today. We join your family, the Department of Planning, the Faculty of Built Environment, the College of Art and Built Environment, and all friends and loved ones, and the larger public to honor you and your immense contribution through this inaugural lecture. Professor Poku-Boansi's lecture this evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, puts the spotlight on the sustained and enduring research work of our esteemed professor over the years in transport and urban planning and their interrelationships. As soon as I resume my seat, our distinguished lecturer will treat us to the topic, Transport Poverty in Africa, Planning for Our Mobility Futures in an Era of Sustainability. The lecture will be pivoted on SDGs 1 and 11, which focuses on poverty and sustainable cities and communities. Our lecturer will enlighten and engage us on the phenomenon of transport poverty in Africa. We'll explore current knowledge on the subject, situate it within empirical context, and provoke discussions about research and policy futures for improved transport and mobility on the continent. He will further proceed to touch on poverty and mobility with the aim of contextualizing their meaning and how they are interrelated. Our scholar will highlight the conditions under which an individual or household can be classified as being transport poor. Using selected indicators related to SDGs that are generally used to measure transport poverty, our lecturer will highlight the incidence of the phenomenon of transport poverty in Ghana. In steering us to a safe landing, a distinguished scholar will share with us some past policy interventions of the government of Ghana and their outcomes, and what possible futures we will be confronted with based on the strategy we adopt as a country. He will conclude the lecture by proffering some policy recommendations and charge all of us to work towards addressing the phenomenon of transport poverty, as he believes our failure to do so will make our country's attempt to achieve the SDGs an uphill task. Now, his profile. Professor Micheal Poku-Boansi was born on 18 June 1978 at Micheal Camp, Tema, in the Greater Accra region, to Mr. Anthony Yao Boansi, who is present to grace this occasion, and Mrs. Margaret Boansi of blessed memory. Daddy, where are you? Is Daddy here? Can we give it out for him? Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. He started his elementary education at the Services Primary School at the 1st Battalion Infantry Tema, and later continued at Ashaman number 4 Junior Secondary School for his BCE. He then proceeded to Pope John Secondary. Okay, you can do it, you can do it. All right, thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. He enrolled at KNUST to read the BSc Planning Program and graduated in 2003. Our eminent scholar had his national service at the Department of Planning and was among the pioneers of the Vice-Chancellor's Staff Development Program in 2004. He obtained his Ph.D. in planning from our university in 2008, being the first to graduate from that program. He was appointed a lecturer in 2009 and promoted to senior lecturer 2012. In 2017, he was appointed associate professor, and in the year 2020, full professor. You are sitting down, not clapping. Hey, clap, oh. Thank you, thank you. That's a lot of work, you know. Thank you. Professor Micheal Poku-Boansi's research has resulted in several publications. He has, to his credit, over 100 publications, including papers in peer-reviewed journals, books and book chapters, conference proceedings, policy briefs, and over 40 consultancy reports. He has attended and presented his research at many conferences and workshops, both nationally and internationally. His research output has informed various societal concerns and interventions related to public transport planning and governance, resettlement and urban planning, and also urban development. The issues addressed by his research are highly relevant in the context of the SDGs, especially given the necessity of developing and promoting sustainable cities and making them inclusive, safe, and resilient. Professor Poku-Boansi served as the resettlement specialist for the feasibility studies of the railway line from Kumasi to Paga, Central Spine, and Ghana-Burkina Faso Intercontinental Railway Project. He also served as the specialist for the preparation of the Resettlement Action Plan for Phase 1 of the Monrovia Urban Sanitation Infrastructure Project. He was the specialist for the socio-economic monitoring of the Poku-Boansi-Amasaman Road Interchange Project and prepared the master plan for the Tetrim and Esase resettlement projects for Asanko Gold. Do you know the Poku-Boansi interchange? And you didn't clap? Hey. Thank you very much. Clap when you have to, please. We won't collect money from you. Our distinguished lecturer is an active sportsman and an excellent footballer. He won several sporting laurels at the secondary school level, a Guza Goal King, and was also a member of the youth team of the Kumasi Asante Kotoko. Thank you. Thank you. During his undergraduate years. A great example, and I say this to the secondary school students here, a great example of the nexus between academic and sporting excellence. Professor Micheal Poku-Boansi is married to Mrs. Natalia Poku-Boansi, the Regional Systems and Services Manager for Newmont Ghana Gold Limited. Madam, where are you? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. Yes. Behind every successful man, thank you. They are blessed with 3 children, Anthony, Mary Agatha, and Raphael. Professor Micheal Boansi's full profile, including grants, his service to local and international bodies and agencies, and many more, are detailed in the lecture brochure and on our website. Please help yourself to both the hard and the soft copies. Now, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, with a standing ovation, and a big round of applause, kindly help me welcome Professor Micheal Poku-Boansi.
The Vice-Chancellor, Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Registrar, Provost of the College of Art and Built Environment, Provosts and Directors of this great institution of ours, Deans of Faculties, Heads of Departments, Head Department of Planning, colleagues from the Department of Planning, Nananum, members of Convocation, distinguished guests and friends of the university, Pojoba National and Pojoba 97-year group, planning class of 2003, ladies and gentlemen of the press, family and friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor for me to deliver my inaugural lecture in this great university of ours, the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, the world's best in quality education delivery. It is indeed a great pleasure that several colleagues of mine, advisors, friends, and family have returned to Kumasi, some from quite far distances, to be part of this occasion. The title of my inaugural lecture, Transport Poverty in Africa, Planning for Our Mobility Futures in an Era of Sustainability, has apparently intrigued and perhaps even puzzled some of you. If that is the case, it is my hope that by the end of this lecture, much would have been clarified. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, as a young boy growing up, I was privileged to have had my secondary education in one of Ghana's best secondary schools, Pope John Secondary and Junior Secondary. Traveling to school from Tema through the Kriapim Mountains was characterized by waking up at 4 a.m. to catch the first Peugeot 504 vehicle. 30 minutes late meant I had to wait at the bus terminal for about 6 hours before catching the next available vehicle. With time, I came to realize that the practice which was normal to me during the 3-year period was rather my first experience of being transport poor. And just like myself, I'm certain that many of you here have experienced transport poverty without realizing it. The journey in charting my research path began during the 3rd year of my undergraduate years, when I took the course PL 357, Transportation Planning. Specifically, this interest was developed when my colleagues and I had the opportunity to get involved in a student project work. Our task was to examine the effects of the activities of commercial drivers at Mecca, and Mecca is our teaching area of the university. One of our recommendations was to restrict the movement of these commercial vehicles to Mecca because of the externalities associated with the work that they do, and this included noise pollution and safety challenges. The proposal, which was subsequently implemented by the then university management, made me realize that I had contributed in solving real-life challenges. Professor Chair, distinguished guest, in December 2004, I got the opportunity to enroll in the staff development program of the Vice-Chancellor to pursue my postgraduate studies. My Ph.D. research topic, Determinants of Urban Transport Services Pricing in Ghana, helped pin down my research interest in transportation. Between 2005 and 2008, while pursuing my Ph.D., I was privileged to be part of the Vision Consul's team that took part in the World Bank-funded research in the impact of transport investment on poverty reduction in the then 5 regions of Ghana. This study made me appreciate in practice the importance of road projects to communities, households, and individuals' effort in reducing poverty and sustaining livelihoods. When I joined the Department of Planning as a lecturer in February 2009, I continued the journey of building my research path with an emphasis on transport, land use planning, and their interrelationships. As a young scholar, I became fascinated with anything transport-related, and most of my research output reflected this interest and has been so ever. In April 2016, I got the opportunity to be selected as one of the professional residence fellows of the Rockefeller Foundation program in Bellagio, Italy. During my residency, I had the privilege of sharing my research titled Formalizing the Informal Public Transport Sector in Ghana through Informal Organizations, with a team of varied professionals in music, choreography, health, architecture, literature, and poetry. The diversity of the team at the residency enabled me to appreciate further the importance of transportation from a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary perspective. I once again got the opportunity to be awarded the Commonwealth Academic Fellowship Program at the Institute for Transport Studies at the University of Leeds in the UK. During that period, I spent time examining the framework for effective governance of public transport service delivery in Ghana. Professor Chair, distinguished guest, all these experiences helped me in consolidating my research path as an academic. And I quote in a distinguished professor of urban and regional planning, Professor Akosua, that transportation is as old as man himself. It started with Adam's movement away from home, giving Lucifer the opportunity to persuade Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. Verse 8 further states, and I quote, God used one of the oldest and one of the most efficient modes of transportation, walking. It reads, that evening, they heard the Lord God walking in the garden, and they hid from him among the trees. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, since then, several modes of transportation have evolved to facilitate the movement of goods and passengers and to facilitate poverty reduction efforts of households. To help us appreciate the importance of poverty and mobility, I want to state that poverty is one of the greatest challenges of humanity and the dominant discourse in development thinking, especially in developing countries. It is key as it remains number one of the Sustainable Development Goals and a priority area of African Union's Agenda 2063. Although there is no universally agreed definition of what poverty is, the concept is concerned with the inability of individuals to access and afford different services. Research has revealed that close to 900 million people around the world today are in severe poverty, based on the poverty line criteria of $1.90 per person per day, updated to $2.15 per person per day in September 2022 by the World Bank. The World Bank further states that between 75 million to 90 million people have been plunged into extreme poverty, mainly due to COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine. The concepts and operationalization of poverty have evolved to include non-income dimensions, even though there are varied views on the phenomenon. For example, what poverty is to someone in Canada is different from what it is to someone in Burundi. Todaro and Smith have highlighted some of the voices of the poor on what poverty is, and I want to present a few of them. From a man in Kenya, this is what he thinks poverty is. Don't ask me what poverty is, because you have met it outside my house. Look at the house and count the number of holes. Look at the utensils and the clothes I'm wearing. Look at everything and write what you see. What you see is poverty. A woman from Uganda also had this to say. When one is poor, she has no say in public. She feels inferior. She has no food, so there is famine in her house, no clothing, and no progress in her family. To a visually impaired person in Moldova, poverty is, for a poor person, everything is terrible. Illness, humiliation, shame. We are cripples. We are afraid of everything. We depend on everyone. No one needs us. We are like garbage that everyone wants to get rid of. Similarly, Professor Chair, distinguished guests, in my study to profile the poor in selected districts in Ghana, I highlighted some of the voices of the poor, and I want to present two of them. For an old man in Kato in the Upper West region, poverty simply means that, and this is how he quotes it, "Have you experienced poverty before, my son? Never wish that for anyone. It actually deforms you, kills your inner spirit, and above all, make you a laughingstock. In a society where only the rich matter, you sometimes wonder if it is worth living." And the most interesting one was from a 55-year-old man in Insoko in the Tyne district, and this is what he says. "My brother, for me, poverty is my inability to buy new clothes for my children at the end of the year and not being able to marry a second wife." Distinguished guests, these voices suggest that poverty is multidimensional and moves beyond income and lack of material goods. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, Figure 1, as seen on the map there, so on the slide there, presents the incidence of poverty in Ghana. The darker the color, the more pronounced the incidence of poverty. While West, in the Upper West region, is the poorest in the country with an incidence of over 89.9%. Busa North, Busa South, Nanumba North, Nanumba South, and Adaklo come next with an incidence between 80% and 89.9%. Accra Metropolis and Kumasi Metropolis are the least poor with rates below 10%. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, an alternative way to visualize the spatial distribution of poverty is through the number of poor individuals as seen in Figure 2. Remote, rural, and isolated areas may have a higher headcount rate, but may have few people living there due to the size of the population. In contrast, the poverty rate may be low in urban areas, but it may be home to many poor people. Kumasi Metropolis is a good example of the contrast between the headcount rate and the number of those poor. It has one of the lowest headcount rates, which is 5.3% in the country, but ranks second highest in the number of poor persons, estimated at 88,935, according to the statistical survey. Another approach to visualizing poverty is using the depth of poverty. Depth of poverty measures how much below the poverty line the poor standard of living is. The lower the depth of poverty, the closer the poor are to the poverty line, and vice versa. As seen in Figure 3, the depth of poverty is also the highest in areas with high headcount rates. This means poverty in these regions is not only widespread, but also entrenched. For the purpose of this lecture, and to help understand the phenomenon, I've used some theories to explain the causes of poverty, and I present a few. The first is the theory of cultural ties and belief system. This theory, Professor Chair, distinguished guest, is rooted in the culture of poverty and dwells on the assertion that poverty is created by the transmission of certain cultural values, beliefs, and skills that are generated socially but held individually from one generation to another. In other words, if your grandfather or father is poor, the chances are that you will become poor because of the norms, the belief, and the values handed down to you. This position, however, is criticized for blaming the poor for their situation and for assuming that the poor have a distinct subculture that perpetuates poverty. This is because the poor have the chance to learn the ways of the rich, to break the shackles of poverty and deprivation. And they do this through spatial interaction, which are facilitated through transport and mobility. The second theory is the theory of individual deficiencies. And this theory argues that individuals are responsible for their poverty situation. So if you are poor, you are the cause of your own poverty. Proponents argue that virtue, hard work, and talent can lead to abundance. Hence, poverty should be viewed as the individual's inability to be successful. The third and final theory is the theory of geographical disparities. And this theory asserts that poverty is caused by geographical disparities between different regions, towns, and neighborhoods, and giving rise to the emergence of what they call the geography of poverty. In other words, certain areas are more resource endowed than others. And consequently, people from poor neighborhoods who achieve a certain level of success, for instance in education, tend to migrate out of these localities, thus leaving such neighborhoods poor. Professor Chair, distinguished guest, in our everyday life or conversation, we implicitly or explicitly refer to the problem of transport poverty. We are all very familiar with transport in our everyday life. Hardly a day goes by without using at least one of the various modes of transport, such as walking and cycling. Transport has been extensively described in literature as the engine of mobility, without which spatial interaction and economic activities within and between urban areas and other geographical areas cease to exist. Authors have also argued about the importance of transport to urban growth, as it influences the pattern of growth. For example, the commencement of the development of the Akosua Road interchange in 2001 saw major shifts in land use conversion and development by 2011 along the corridor in both Akosua and Akosua, as seen in Figure 4. Providing transport infrastructure or reducing barriers to travel, which results in transport poverty and social exclusion, can serve as an important strategy for addressing poverty. This is because an efficient and reliable transport system, widens the range of opportunities for employment and education, among others. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, in this lecture, I have adopted the definition espoused by Lucas et al. In 2016, which indicates that an individual is transport poor if to satisfy the daily basic activity needs, at least one of the following conditions apply. So please, if you are here, and one of these points affects you, then you are transport poor. The first is that when there is literally no transport option available that is suited to your physical condition and capabilities. The second is that when the existing transport options do not reach destinations where you can fulfill your daily activity needs in order to maintain a reasonable quality of life. The third is that when your weekly amount spent on transport leaves your households with a residual income below the official poverty line. And then 4, when you spend an excess amount of time traveling, including waiting time, leading to time poverty or social isolation. And finally, when the prevailing travel conditions are dangerous, unsafe, or unhealthy for you. Ironically, across many African cities, including Accra and Kumasi, the unreliability of the transport system limits access to services, businesses, and employment opportunities, among others. In addition, the non-uniform spatial distribution of land use and transport network results in unequal access to destinations, and this makes people transport poor. It must be noted, however, that transport poverty is not just in the developing world. Transport poverty exists in wealthy Europe too. For example, Sostran in 2012 has estimated that nearly 1.5 million people in England are at risk of suffering from transport poverty. To Lucas et al. In 2016, the report by Sostran combines 3 aspects of transport poverty, which are applicable in cities in sub-Saharan Africa. So if you escape the first 5 and you live in a neighborhood that has these 3 conditions, then you can be classified as living in a neighborhood which is transport poor. The first are areas of low income where the cost of running a car will place a significant strain on your household budget. The second is areas where it takes over an hour to access essential goods and services, either by walking, cycling, or public transport. And then finally, where you live in an area where a significant proportion of residents live more than 1.6 kilometers from their nearest bus stop or railway station, then you are transport poor. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, to highlight the incidence of transport poverty in Ghana and Africa, I have selected some indicators to illuminate the scenery. These indicators are related to the SDGs and are used generally in measuring the phenomenon. The first indicator is the proportion of monthly income and monthly expenditure on transportation. Transport affordability as a measure of poverty focuses on the inability of people to afford the cost of transportation. If a household spends more than 10% of its income on transportation-related expenses, it is deemed transport poor. According to Ajima et al. In 2019, in Accra and Kumasi, 2 daily trips cost 60% and 48.5% of a typical family's daily income, respectively. Overall, about 20.3% of Ghanaian households spend 15% of their entire income on transportation. And if you juxtapose this with the threshold of 10%, we can comfortably argue that 20.3% of Ghanaian households are transport poor. According to the Ghana Statistical Service, 35% of Ghanaian households have indicated that the most important problem is high transportation fares. This is particularly pronounced among the middle-class households as they spend the most, 15.9%, on transportation. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, my study in 2022 on household travel patterns in Accra and Kumasi revealed that to mitigate the impact of high expenditure on transport, 64.4% of the respondents resorted to walking, usually over 60 minutes a day to work. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, my study among school children in the Adenta municipality also revealed that 63.7% and 65.5% of the house of school children walk to and from school respectively on a daily basis. It is important to note that walking in itself is encouraged, but the lack of good pedestrian infrastructure makes this mode unsafe to many, primarily the low-income people. The next indicator is the number of trips per day by an individual or a household. Data from the National Transport Survey indicate that households with high traffic generation levels on the average make between 11 and 13 trips per day, while those with low traffic generation levels on the average make between 1 and 4 trips per day. My study of trip-making characteristics in Kumasi revealed that high-income households made about 35% more trips than those in the lower income category. This is particularly so because people who are deemed low income or poor tend to minimize or they forego what they term expensive trips, and this sometimes contributes to social exclusion, which is an attestation of transport poverty. The next indicator is access to public transport routes. Chairperson et al. In 2022, in examining access to public transport routes in Accra, found out that within a threshold of 5 minutes of walking, the total area with access to public transport stops was relatively smaller at 37%, compared to that of the available public transport access routes in city. The findings of Chairperson et al. Suggest that potential reachability to both public transport routes and stations is poor, thus making individuals within 5 minutes or more walking time to access public transport routes or stations transport poor. In other words, if you are here and you walk for more than 30 minutes without accessing a public transport station, then you can be classified as transport poor. The emergence of new estates, informalities, peri-urbanization, among others, have made these increasingly large areas inaccessible by public transport in our major cities. Individuals who experience this form of poverty are confronted with the common practice where public transport operators increase fares during peak periods, and I'm sure some of you have experienced that before. Or if you are going to a peripheral community, they will want to charge more, to levels significantly higher than what they would have usually charged or are permitted to charge. It is important for us to note that this practice worsens the accessibility challenges faced by such individuals. The next indicator is vehicle ownership. Developed countries such as the United States have 837 per 1,000 people respectively owning motor vehicles. Within sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa has 165 per 1,000 people, while in Ghana, the figure is estimated as 33 per 1,000 people. According to Ankama and Srinivasan, 9.8% of households in Ghana do not own a vehicle. And this large proportion implies that the only option available to them is public transport and walking. However, it is instructive to note that 54.1% of households in Ghana are not satisfied with public transport availability in their communities. They cite long delays and unpredictable schedules as the main reasons. Also, according to the Ghana Statistical Service, about 34.7% of Ghanaians have never traveled by bus before. And when I read this, I was shocked that we have 34.7% of our populace who have never traveled by bus. And this implies that the only option available to them is to walk, and this compounds the constraints that are associated with their activities. The next is access to social amenities, and here I present two indicators, health and education. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, the WHO expects an individual to travel not more than 8 kilometers to access healthcare. Kara et al. In 2017 reported that the likelihood of stillbirth is 26.6% higher for kids whose mothers live more than 10 kilometers away from the nearest health facility. In Nigeria, Benkat Thomas et al. In 2021 also found that women who had live births travel on the average 7.3 kilometers, while those with stillbirth traveled beyond 8.5 kilometers. In Ghana, the mean Euclidean distance from all localities to the closest secondary health facility is 10.74 kilometers. And this is according to Ashabo et al. In 2020. And this figure is 2.74 kilometers longer than the WHO threshold. Data from the National Transport Survey indicate that 60.6% of Ghanaians spend 30 minutes or more to access a health facility. According to the Ministry of Roads and Highways, Ministry of Transport, and the Ghana Statistical Service, the main transport issues that further deepen transport access to health facility and transport poverty include difficulty in getting a vehicle to access health facility, long waiting times, and longer distances. This highlights some significant disparities in accessing healthcare, and these disparities imply that those who are transport poor suffer the most. The next is education. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, for children to be mobile and receive an equitable education, the distance between school and home is essential. The length and quality of a student's trip to school may have an impact on his or her engagement and academic performance. The distances students in Europe on the average travel to elementary school across all settlement type was less than 5 kilometers, and this is according to the European Commission Joint Research Center in 2021. However, in Kumasi, many school children start their journeys far from the city, with a documented average distance of 14 kilometers, according to Aduma Samoa et al. 2015. The finding from Kumasi is applicable to most urban centers in Ghana, and this has been compounded by the traffic congestion along the major arterials. In addition, the typical commuting time for high school students in the Philadelphia districts is assessed to be 28.9 minutes. In South Africa, it is 59 minutes. However, in Ghana, Aduma Samoa et al. In 2015 reported an average of 90 minutes, citing the dispersed location of these school children and the challenges they encounter daily to access education. The last indicator is externalities. And here I present exposure in terms of noise pollution and traffic-related fatalities and severe injuries. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, about 80% of Ghana's air pollution is caused by the sooting of its car fleet. The WHO has estimated that illness caused by ambient air pollution in Accra alone accounts for roughly 3,000 fatalities each year. In addition, dust from road construction also contributes substantially to air pollution. As of 2016, the WHO annual recommended threshold of 10 grams per cubic meter had been substantially exceeded by the annual mean of 31.1. And this raises the risk of respiratory illness, according to the WHO. According to the World Bank, in 2019, the annual loss from traffic-related fatalities and severe injuries in Ghana totaled $4.55 billion, or 8.3% of the country's GDP. The economically active group, that is those between the ages of 15 and 64, is affected the most, with more than 70% of traffic-related deaths and injuries affecting people in this group. In addition, the most vulnerable of all road users are pedestrians, who make up 43% of total fatalities recorded. According to the National Road Safety Commission, among pedestrians, which make up 43% of total fatalities, child victims account for up to 31%. In addition, between 2014 and 2016, about 9% of casualties recorded in Ghanaian towns and cities involved children below the age of 16 and were mostly in schools, with school ages ranging between 6 and 15 years. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, with the existing challenge of poor infrastructure and inadequate pedestrian crossing facilities, and a greater proportion of school children going to school by foot, it can be deduced that most of our school children are transport poor due to their exposure to the risk of a road traffic collision. As stated earlier, when the prevailing travel conditions are dangerous, unsafe, or unhealthy for an individual, then he or she is said to be transport poor. And this fear of being knocked down is a concern of most parents. In one of my studies in Adenta, Accra, a parent had this to say, and I quote, "Every time I come to school in the morning to drop my kids or my children, or to pick them up in the afternoon, you'll find other children trying to cross the road without any assistance. I sometimes stop other drivers to allow them to cross. I always get scared, and I have informed the school authorities and tabled this in one of the Parent Teachers Association meetings, but I think nothing has been done." And Professor Chair, with this, I want to add that when I stay at the graduate school and I see the students rushing to board our buses, I get scared. And this is a reflection of what some of the parents experience. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, of the proportion who walk to school, to test, walk unaccompanied. And this is because both parents of these children are actively working, and they are unable to accompany their children every day. This phenomenon exposes the children to danger due to their limited capacity to evaluate risk. In instances where parents hire commercial drivers to drop their children at school, some of these drivers drop off these children at the entrances of the schools, thus endangering their lives. And a parent had an experience to share, and I quote, "I arranged with a taxi driver to drop off and pick up my children from school. However, I decided to stop the practice because my last child, who was 7 years, was knocked down by another taxi driver who was in a hurry to drop some other children at school, injuring my boy. It was a nightmare for me. This happened because the driver I hired dropped my kids at the entrance of the school as he was in a hurry to pick another passenger to town. I have now decided to do it myself, even though it is very stressful at times. It is worthy sacrifice I must make just for the safety of my children." Professor Chair, distinguished guests, recognizing this problem, the government of Ghana, through the revised National Transport Policy of 2020, commits to continuously invest in transport infrastructure and subsidize transport services that provide mainly social and environmental benefits, particularly to the poor and physically challenged. However, past experience has shown that we have not been very successful. The government of Ghana's free bus ride for school children, initiated and launched in 2006 to provide access to free bus ride service to school children in uniform up to the junior high school level, could not be sustained for obvious reasons, funding. According to Yobo, by the time that the program ended, a record total of 32 million free rides to and from school for this vulnerable population had been recorded. Even though it was an important initiative, it did not cover rides for pleasure, lengthy journeys, or weekend transit involving the same group of children. It also did not cover school children who were not enrolled in uniform, or who were not enrolled in school or were not wearing school uniform. This implied that the mobility needs of these children were not met by the initiative, and the inability to sustain the project aggravated the mobility challenges of our children. Professor Chair, compared to fixed rail which is more expensive and difficult for developing countries to finance, bus rapid transit is thought to offer a considerable, more affordable option for public transportation. BRT adoption, however, has been difficult in many African cities. Ghana's intention to introduce a BRT in Accra began with a trial in 2012, but could not be sustained. However, a bus service, what we popularly call Ayalolo, was introduced in 2016 over a 22-kilometer circuit. After losing money and having drivers protest about their unpaid wages, the new bus service folded in 2018 due to minimal ridership. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, our BRT system started at the same time as our counterparts in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam. Whilst Ghana's project could not see the light of day, the project in Tanzania became a success and currently has 305 buses, carries 300,000 passengers daily, and became the first African city to win the Sustainable Transport Award in 2018. Deducing from the outcome of these two initiatives of the government of Ghana, it will not be far-fetched to conclude that transport poverty is going to stay with us for a very long time to come, unless some drastic interventions are carefully planned and implemented. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, what future we will be confronted with will easily and essentially be based on the strategy we adopt today. We can either go the do-nothing scenario or the conscious journey scenario. When I say do nothing, it's a strategy for decision-making that may appear cheaper and less laborious, as it allows the status quo to perpetuate itself. So all that we need to do is fold our arms and allow the status quo to go on. Even though the strategy may be useful in certain instances, addressing the challenges associated with transport poverty cannot be one of such instances, as this would imply longer travel time, air and noise pollution, traffic injuries, and high fares, among others. This future should not be what we should envisage. This is because the consequences will put a lot more people in the transport poverty domain and make Ghana's poverty reduction effort a Herculean task. And to meet the demands of the future, I propose the following recommendations. The first is that the Ministry of Transport and the Land Use and Spatial Planning Authority should work to implement an integrated land use and transport planning regime that has improving access as the overriding priority. Historically, the planning regime in Ghana has not been able to address all our concerns, primarily because of its weaknesses in managing urban growth. As shown by several studies, unfettered and unplanned growth leads to unsustainable outward expansion, and this pushes the limited public transport infrastructure and urban opportunities further away from the poor. And what that means is that the prevailing accessibility challenges and the possibility of worsening these challenges begins with addressing the problem of uncontrolled urban expansion. The second recommendation, Professor Chair, distinguished guests, and is argued by Venter in 2011, and I share with that most people living in material poverty in African cities live in informal and slum settlements, many of which are located a long way from the centralized economic and social activity areas of the city. In instances where they are located more centrally, they cover vast areas of land, most of which lack any formal pathways or transport infrastructure. And this causes a spatial dislocation between key destinations such as employment centers, schools, and hospitals, often leading to longer journey times. There is therefore the need to redevelop our informal settlements into sustainable communities, where access to basic socio-economic facilities abound, thus reducing the need to travel substantially. What this means is that if you live in a neighborhood where all the essentials are available, then you don't have to travel. You only travel when it's essential. The Ministry of Works and Housing Ministry of Local Government, Decentralization and Rural Development, and the Land Use and Special Planning Authority should drive this process. In addition to the preparation of the district medium-term plans and structure plans, which our MMDAs are engaging, I propose the preparation of local transport plans. Local transport plans, Professor Chair, distinguished guests, are strategic documents outlining policies for sustainable transport in our local areas. The aim of the local transport plans should be the development of a sustainable and inclusive transportation system that seeks to ensure travel time savings, reductions in travel costs, accessibility improvement, and reduce the negative impact of transport on the environment. The fourth recommendation is that the seeming lack of involvement of local authorities in the provision of public transport services has resulted in users of public transport services being captive and at the mercy of private operators. To help ensure that the needs of the traveling public are met and the interests protected, I recommend that local authorities begin to explore the possibility of partnering with the private sector to provide improved bus service within their jurisdiction. Strategic transport planning that is age and disability friendly should be the way for us to go and must be spearheaded by the Ministry of Local Government, Decentralization and Rural Development. There's also an urgent need for the government of Ghana, through the Ministry of Transport, to seriously implement public transport service schemes as one of the best ways to stabilize transport costs and particularly minimize the financial stress on lower income people, improved access, affordability, and mobility needs of the people. The case of Dar es Salaam, our friends in Tanzania, should inspire us as a country. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, Ghana as a country needs better integration of transport options, including modes for active travel. The Ministry of Transport and Roads and Highways must ensure that newly developing road infrastructure projects, as a matter of priority, must be integrated by including the infrastructure needed to support cycling and walking in our cities. Aside from the health benefits associated with being active, it will in the long run reduce government expenditure on healthcare as well as provide a sustainable means of travel for most of our people. The government of Ghana is working to achieve the SDGs. At KNUST, we have SDG policy champions. I wish to state emphatically that our quest to achieve the SDG will become a mirage if we don't pay particular attention to the incidence of transport poverty. This is because transport poverty will become Ghana's latent cause of missing out on the SDGs. And to forestall this, I propose the development of a national transport poverty index led by the partnership between the Ministries of Transport and Local Government, Decentralization and Rural Development, and academia to measure how far our various MMDAs are addressing transport poverty. The National Transport Poverty Index will also be used to rank the various MMDAs. Variables such as transport access, transport mobility, transport affordability, exposure to transport externalities, and inclusiveness could serve as the basis for developing such an index. The development and use of the National Transport Poverty Index will be the first of its kind globally and will serve as a useful tool in shaping transport investment decisions in the future. And finally, the Ministry of Transport and academia must begin studies leading to planning for Ghana's transport futures related to electric vehicles, automating vehicles, and mobility as a mass, and other innovations to work in our local context. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, this recommendation may seem far from us, but the emergence of ride-hailing services such as Bolt and Uber, just to mention a few, should remind us of the global nature of the world we are in today and the need to prepare for the future. And to end, Professor Chair, ladies, distinguished guests, permit me to take this opportunity to thank some people. The fact that I'm standing here today on this platform was made possible by many. Unfortunately, I'm constrained by this lecture time to thank each one of you individually, and please forgive me for that. But I would like to highlight a few. I wish to thank the Vice-Chancellor of KNUST-TEK, Professor Mrs. Rita Dickson, and past Vice-Chancellors in the persons of Professor William Otuelis, Professor Kwesi Obridanso, and the Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Professor William Ellis Owusudabo, and past Pro-Vice-Chancellors for the advice they have given me. A special thanks to the Registrar, Mr. Andrews Kwesi Boateng, for the support he's offered me throughout this journey. A special thanks goes to my mentor and Professor Chair distinguished guests who permit me to ask Emeritus Professor Kwesi Adakwa to please stand. Please feel free to them. This Chairman, distinguished guests, Professor Kwesi Adakwa, who is also a former Vice-Chancellor of this great university of ours, was the one who broadened my horizon in planning education and also helped me in supervising me during my transport planning journey as a Ph.D. student. Prof, after first encounter, by following Mr. George Seguadi, whom you asked after your lecture if I understood what you taught, and his subsequent answer, and I quote, "Prof, please wait till we write the exams and see." Okay. Made a special pledge to work hard and strive to excel in my chosen path. Back then, I saw a mentor who did not believe in my capacity to excel in his class, but still gave me a chance. I believe this view of yours, Professor Emeritus, started to change during your supervision of my Ph.D. studies, and perhaps may have changed completely today. Thank you very much. I also want to thank my provost, Professor John Tiabugri, and his colleague provosts and directors, past provost of Kabe, the dean of my faculty, and the University Appointment Promotion Committee for their trust in my abilities. A special thanks goes to all staff of the Department of Planning, both teaching and non-teaching staff, my head of department and colleagues. We have over the years become one great family, despite our individual differences. To my former lecturers at the Department of Planning, and I can see Professor Frani seated here, Prof, I want to thank you for all that you have done. A special thanks goes to Professor Emmanuel Kamaklu, who taught me urban economics during my third year as an undergraduate student and supervised my undergraduate project work. Prof Chair, distinguished guests, I want to say a big thank you, even though he's not here, to the memory of Professor J.Y. Koko. As HOD, he encouraged me to enroll on the Vice-Chancellor's Staff Development Program and helped me organize my thought and my activities when my intended trip to the University of Newcastle upon Tyne fell through. To my past and present students, I say a big thank you. You have shaped my thinking, understanding, and knowledge in different ways and contexts. I appreciate all priests, including past and present chaplains and assistant priests of the KNUST Catholic chaplaincy, and all my spiritual advisors. Thank you for your counsel and spiritual guidance. And several people have critically read through earlier versions of this lecture. Many, many thanks for your valuable and constructive comments. At this point, I also want to thank all the members who helped in organizing this event, particularly the chair, Prof, of the Public Lecture Committee and the members, and also my in-house committee headed by Professor Daniel Duya for the work done. Without you, I guess I will still be struggling with organizational activities. To my valuable friends, especially Nanaya, Koku Minta, and Irene Oche, you have shown that social ties are disproportionate, correlated to the frequency of meetings and answering one's phone call. You have become part of my family. Thank you for all the love, understanding, encouragement, and cheerful moments together. Our bond will never be broken. Special thanks go to all my in-laws for everything we have gone through. And to you, Dr. Mrs. Ivy Bonny, remember we have a deal. I'll be waiting patiently for the day you will stand here to give your lecture, and that is my challenge to you. A big thanks to my parents, especially my father, old soldier, Mr. Anthony Boansi, and Mrs. Margaret Boansi of blessed memory. You taught me to become independent early on in life. You insisted that the only way you allowed me to play football was to excel in school. By this, you inculcated in me the enabling factors to pursue all kinds of aspiration, resulting in what I am today. To my siblings, Reverend Father Raphael Boansi, Gabriel, Mary, and Emmanuel, thanks for the love, prayer, and support throughout this journey. To my wife, Natalia, I say a big thank you for all that you have done since I began this journey. I can't thank you enough, but the Most High will surely reward you for everything you have sacrificed for me. And finally, to my beautiful children, Anthony, Maria Agatha, and Raphael, I am immensely grateful for your love, understanding, and the many questions you have asked along the line. Combining my career at KNUST with its many missions and family life has not been ideal for you, but we have been able to grapple with life challenges and somehow manage. Without you, I would not be standing here today. I'm proud and happy to be with you. Thank you, my angels. Professor Chair, distinguished guests, before I end, I call something a take-home. And the take-home is essentially who is transport poor. And I want to say, if you are here and you have no suitable transport options available to you, then you are transport poor. If you are here and you have a transport system that is not reliable, then you are transport poor. If you have a transport system or you spend on transport services more than 10% of your earnings, monthly earnings, then you are transport poor. If you are here and to assess the basic essentials of life, you travel more than 60 minutes to do that, or more than 1.6 kilometers, then you can be classified as being transport poor. And finally, if the mode that you use is dangerous, unsafe, or unhealthy, then you are transport poor. And I say this by concluding that without the grace of God and without his blessings, I would not be standing here. Permit me, Professor Chair and distinguished guests, to also thank all of you here present for gracing this occasion. May God bless us all.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, the Professorial Inaugural Lecture on the topic Transport Poverty in Africa, Planning for Our Mobility Futures in an Era of Sustainability, has been delivered by the Venerable Professor Micheal Poku-Boansi. A round of applause once again. So, as part of our tradition to induct him into the College of Professors, his gown he's wearing now will be taken off and be robed in a new gown. I respectfully invite the Vice-Chancellor, who is the chairperson for this program, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor, the Registrar, and the chairperson of the KNUST Public Lecture Committee to do the robing. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Micheal Poku-Boansi. And let's note that the robe was designed and produced by the textile unit of the Department of Industrial Art, KNUST. This moment, we will invite various interest groups to present their gifts to him and congratulate him on this feat. And of course, as tradition demands, the first to take her turn is the wife of Professor Boansi and children. Please welcome Mrs. Natalia Poku-Boansi, children Anthony, Mary, Agatha, and Raphael. What a nice family. Thank you very much. Congratulations once again, Prof. I call on the College of Art and Built Environment, led by the Provost, to do their presentation. Next to present is the Department of Planning, KNUST, led by the head of department. Thank you very much, HOD, Professor Clifford Amoako. Next to present is the School of Graduate Studies, led by the Director, Professor Eric Foucault. Thank you, Professor Foucault. I call on the Ghana Institute of Planners to present And now, Pope John's Old Boys Association, Pojoba. Thank you very much, Pojoba. Please, what key did you sing in? Our last group to present is a hall. Fellows of Unity Hall, Conti. Continentals wanted to sing, but they realized they lost their key, so I will now respectfully invite our distinguished dignitaries right on the front row to come and shake the hands of Professor Poku-Boansi. I will start with former Vice-Chancellor, Professor Kwesi Kwafo Adakwa, to be followed by Professor Kwesi Obri Danso, Professor Charles Ansah, former Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Professor Afrane, former Provost of Kabi, Global Alumni President, Dr. Kweku Agbesi, Nananom on the front row, Protestant chaplain, Catholic chaplain, and then our professors. I don't want to add who have delivered their inaugural lectures, but professors, please come and congratulate Professor Boansi. Yes, so all professors, please. Professor Mahamadou Weja, please join to congratulate Professor Boansi. I acknowledge former Vice-Chancellor also in the queue, Professor William Otuelis. Thank you very much, Professor Poku-Boansi. Congratulations once again. Thank you very much, Eja Konimo. Could we pause there? Sorry about that. I call respectfully on Nana Apejahene to congratulate Professor Boansi.
for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for me. Obiara will tebe nkwaso. If some begin mansan, it is a obi funu nya. Near Podoma, a bisase, one from your day queen, if you wish it. Nana, you ever told it, or here.
Thank you very much, Ejako Nimo. Chairperson, it's my pleasure to acknowledge the various groups of special dignitaries who were invited to grace this occasion. Former Vice-Chancellor, Professor Kwesi Kwafo Adakwa once again. Former Vice-Chancellor, Professor William Oto Ellis. Professor Kwesi Obri Danso, also a former Vice-Chancellor. Reverend Professor Charles Ansan and Professor Peter Donko, both former pro-Vice-Chancellors. Honorable Dr. John Kuma, Deputy Minister for Finance, MP for Ejiso. Honorable Akwesi Konedu, MP for Menchia North. Dr. Kojo Esia Mensah Abrampa, Director General, National Development Planning Commission. Professor Adai Mensah, Chief Executive of Komfanochi Teaching Hospital. Mr. Abraham Entry, Municipal Chief Executive of Ofori Krom. Ms. Adiki Ofebia Aitevi, Vice President, Sustainability and External Relations, Newmont Ghana Gold Limited. Mr. William Ado, owner of Ultimate Fashion. Dr. Mrs. Abena Entry, former member, KNUST Governing Council. Lawyer Anderson Boaben, Fort Well Solicitors, North London. Bishop Gideon Titi Ofe, founder and chairman, Accra Business School. Professor Nicholas Awatri, Director, Institute of Local Government Studies, Accra. Mr. Oseyo Usu, Registrar, Institute of Local Government Studies, Accra. Professor Samuel Kofi Afrani, former Provost of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences and President of Christian Service University College. Mr. Andrews Kakari, Bank KNUST Branch Manager. Professor Martin Otina Bebio, University of Ghana, Legon. Dr. Bernard Cranton York, Director, Vision Consult Limited. Mr. Kwame Agbeko Azuma, Head, of Government Relations, Goldfields, Ghana, Mr. Oko Amate, Mr. John Duty, Team Leader, Invest for Jobs, GIZ-GH, Mr. Prince Kwatin, upon Advisor, Invest for Jobs, GIZ-GH, Mr. Samuel Adoboy, former advisor, GIZ Energy Program, Mr. Isaac Dria, National President, Pope John's Old Boys Association, Pojoba, then the entire membership of Pojoba Unity Hall Fellows, Professor Joshua Ayakwa, former Provost of Kabi, Professor Mark Adoma Samoa, former Provost College of Engineering and STEM Advisor to the Minister for Education, Mr. Moses Chikwe, Internal Auditor, and we have our reps from the Ghana Institute of Planners. Planner, Mr. Mohamed Alassane, President of the Institute of Planners. Planner, Mr. Anna Percy Bukari, Vice President, Ghana Institute of Planners. For members of the clergy, we have Most Reverend Gabriel Anoche, Metropolitan Archbishop of Kumasi Diocese, Reverend Father Dr. Monsignor John Opoku Ajiman, Reverend Father Dr. Peter Ade Mensah, Reverend Father Entribu Isiakon, Reverend Father Micheal Edu Boahen, Reverend Father Dr. Joseph Opon, University of Cape Coast, Reverend Father George Ohime, Clooney Sisters, Reverend Sister Josephine Joyce Anto. To our traditional leaders who came to grace this occasion, Oheneba Owusu Efriye Apejahene, thank you very much for coming. Nana Mensah Bonsu, also known as Professor Edward Bedu, Chief of our Secretary, former Provost of Kabi. Thank you very much for coming. Nana Opoku Ajiman III, Ejase Hene. Nana Kofi Owusu II, Kodia Krum Hene. Representative of Nana Akwesi Awoba II, Enyenesu Hene. Nana Ose Yao Akoto, Enyenesu Sana Hene. Nana Abuaje da Costa, Oyoko Ebusuya Penyi Enyenesu, Nana Asanti Jima Sefa II, Tufuhene Eduamwa Kwewu, Nana Osei Kofi Amwakun, Kumasi Dadiaswaba Chidom Hene, Nana Yasa Edwase Hima, Nana Sewa Enyenesu Hima Chiame, Nana Ama Dufie II, Esuohun Konkon Hima, members of Oyoko Ebusuya Enyenesu, Mr. Charles Jemfi, family head from Ejiso, and last, the father of Professor Micheal Poku-Boansi. Shall we please applaud him? Before we take our closing prayer by Reverend Dr. J.W.A. Champon, shall we please take note of the following announcements? When we are done, refreshments for students will happen here at the Great Hall, but for our invited guests and the staff, we'll head to the senior staff clubhouse. The next announcement will be delivered in the form of an inaugural lecture, but very short. So the KNUST Day of Giving is a very important activity coming up. It's a 24-hour global online fundraising initiative in which a day has been set aside by KNUST to enable alumni, friends, stakeholders such as staff, students, parents, neighbors, business partners to show appreciation to KNUST. The university has gone through a lot, and if today we are #1 in the world on SDG 4, there is every reason to celebrate the university and say thank you. The objective is to rally as many people as possible to create the single biggest wave to make the single biggest impact on the 6th of October, 2023. And note that 6th of October is the day the university was established. The mechanics are simple. This is the official logo. And what will happen is that a platform has been created on which all of us who are to show appreciation could send our token to the platform in any of the major currencies we know of, and you shall be duly acknowledged. The target is to raise 200 million Ghana cedis to put up this 2,000 bed space KNUST Day of Giving hostel. Shall we please applaud the amount? And for those who agree in principle that KNUST has done a lot for you, we are bound to donate. For those who have delivered their inaugural lecture, we expect not less than 1 million cedis each from you. So take note, and we'll be looking forward to that. So what I'm doing now is part of the stakeholder engagement, and you shall be duly acknowledged on a special tablet to be mounted in front of that big hostel. Thank you very much. Before I go, we shall look at the official launch of the Day of Giving by our Chancellor, Otumfuo Osei Tutu II. Control room, can we please have that video on the screen, please?
We would not have been here where we are now. It is therefore a time to really appreciate KNUST. The university will set up an electronic payment.
It happens. Right, so this is it. Thank you very much. Hashtag KNUST Day of Giving. Let's get ready, 6 October, we all give back to our alma mater. I call on Reverend Dr. J.W. Champon to lead us in the closing prayer. Shall we rise?
Please Let us pray. Our Lord and our Master, our hearts are filled with joy and gratitude to you for your goodness and mercies and faithfulness towards us as a people and especially as a university. Your goodness and mercies towards us are uncountable. We thank you for being the Alpha and Omega of everything we do, and we thank you most especially for today, this inaugural lecture. And we thank you that we invited your presence to be with us, and by your grace, you've endowed your Son with wisdom, knowledge, insight, and understanding to deliver this lecture. We thank you for the knowledge we've all acquired. We bless your name for the insights that he has brought out and all the recommendations he has made to the nation for our development. We pray that all these researches, Lord, will contribute to our lives and make us a better people. We commend our university to you. Even as you bless us, may you continue to bless us in all aspects of our lives. Glorify yourself in all that we do and make us ever more relevant to our nation and even beyond. Bless this great university, bless our nation, Ghana, and bless us all. We bless you for hearing our prayers, for we have asked for this and many more blessings through Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen.
Please remain standing for the university anthem. God of our weary, yes, God of our silence, yes, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into daylight, keep us forever in the path we pray. Fish me from the places our Lord will led me, blessed are with the wine of the well we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand. Thank you very much. Shall we please remain standing for the reception of the Vice-Chancellor and invited guests? Congratulations to Professor Micheal Poku-Boansi. Thank you all for coming. We are grateful for your presence. Have a good evening.